you today. My first announcement is for the women's event called Loving Who You Are. This is a free event and perfect to invite your girlfriends, your family to. It's going to take place on April 29th at 6 p.m. For more information and to sign up, go to frontlinegr.com. My second announcement is for Behind the Lines. Behind the Lines is for those of you who consider yourselves core members here at Frontline. At this Behind the Lines, two important topics are being discussed. The first being the possible merger with the addition of a possible campus. The second is about the future of the community center planned for here at Frontline. This Behind the Lines will take place Sunday, April 24th at 6 p.m. in the block. My third and final announcement for you is giving ourselves away. Some of you may be familiar with this. If not, giving ourselves away is the way we here at Frontline give above and beyond our regular tithes and offerings. Giving ourselves away helps go to support camp scholarships for Spring Hill and NTS, as well as our other local and global ministry partners. Here is Brittany Johnson to let us know how giving ourselves away is impacting our global ministries.
When you give toward giving ourselves away, one of the areas that your giving goes toward is our global ministry partner in Ukro, Ethiopia. For example, the most recent project that we worked on was raising funds to put a water point in for the people of Ukro. We raised $10,000 and now are able to fully fund that project for them. Thank you so much to those of you who gave. Now that we are able to put in the water point, people will have access to clean water, and this will even provide jobs for the community. So not only will families be able to be hired to help build the water point, but they will also be able to sell the water once the water point is constructed. This will allow families to raise money to take care of their own family, and it will also boost the overall Ukro economy. This is just one of the many projects that we will be able to help Ukro with as a result of your giving for giving ourselves away.
My name is Lori. Thanks for watching and staying connected, and now you know what's happening at Frontline.
Awesome. Hey, just a couple more things. I'd like to invite the ushers forward for the offering, and this is just another way that we worship. I believe that the treasure of our heart is revealed with the way we deal with our money. So just another way we can worship and put that first step forward in giving some of our hard-earned money. So there are three ways to give. Number one, you see the ushers, the lovely faces here. That's one way. As the plate passes past you, feel free to put money in there. Also, we can give online at frontlinegr.com. This is super simple and super time effective. So basically you can set up recurring payments there. So if you guys are going to go camping or something for the summer, you're not going to be around, but you still want to be able to give, what a great way to be able to do that. Also, you can text any amount to that number, and that will set you up to give as well. It's super simple. It's also very safe. We would never compromise your bank information, we promise. Okay, sound good? Cool. So also we are in this series called Join Generations. If you haven't been with us the last couple weeks, that's the series we're in. Actually, one of our pastors, Matthew Deprez, wrote a book titled Join Generations, and it's out in the lobby for sale at the welcome desk for $5. So a couple things on that. Number one, I think it costs us about $6 to order those, so we're not making any money on these. Matthew's not making any money on these. We just feel so important. We feel that it's so important to get these into your hands. And so you can begin to implement some of these things in your families and here in the church. And we're just super, super excited about what's happening through this series and the mentorships and all that stuff. So we want to make sure you guys have the opportunity to have that book if you want it. So $5. Cool? Awesome. Let's say a word of prayer before we dive into the message. Heavenly Father, again, we're here for you. God, we long for you to speak to us. God, we're grateful for this time that we can just set apart, where we can come and we can learn about you. We can sing praises to you. God, thank you for this time. And God, as we are challenged maybe today to dive into discipleship relationships or mentoring relationships, God, may we be receptive to what you're saying, and may we be obedient to the calling maybe you're putting on our hearts and on our lives. So God, we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen. So speaking of joint generations, we're going to start the message off with a great video. And it's a video that just represents one of the mentoring relationships that's actually taking place in our church body right now. And there's more like this that's happening, but we want to see more like this. So this is just a great testimony. We'd love for you to check out the screens, and we'll jump right into that, okay?
My name is Morgan Naki, and Deb has been a mentor to me for 7 years. Deb is a world of things to me. She is a wonderful friend. She is a spiritual counselor. She is a second grandma to my son. She's a second mom to me and my husband. And she is by far the best mentor I've ever had. So I got baptized in 2009. I didn't realize at that time I really needed somebody in my life to kind of show me God's love with their actions. And I didn't know I needed a mentor. And Deb filled those shoes very fast.
I'm Deb Chapman. I've known Morgan for about 7 years now. When I first met Morgan, I could see the love of Jesus in her. And I could also see the love for the kids. And I realized that we had a lot of things that we felt the same about. And I wanted to get her to know her better. And we got to see each other every Sunday. But I wanted to get to know her on a deeper level, so we started going out for lunches sometimes and really started sharing our life with each other and opening up to each other. As the relationship began progress, we began to share prayer requests with each other. And she started sharing with me how, since she became a Christian, she knew that she needed new friends in her life.
So when I was in a lot of those toxic relationships, and especially the one with my very emotionally abusive ex-boyfriend, I would come in and what I thought was normal, I would talk to them about, and she would very quickly help me see that how I was being treated wasn't how God wanted me to be treated. She helped me to pray through what my worth was and helped me to see biblically that I was worth so much more. Yeah, mentoring has changed my life forever. And I would say Deb, as my mentor, has changed my life forever because it showed me what God's love is, not just through words but through actions. And it's helped me to form a community for my family. It's provided me wisdom when I haven't really known what to do with certain situations. And it's helped me want to be a mentor to somebody younger than me and be able to be that person for somebody because of how much it's changed my life, because I don't know where I would be without it. I'm actually afraid of where I would be without it.
I set out to love this young girl that I seen so much potential in. And I was the one that was blessed. And she would call me and ask me to pray for her. What an honor to pray for someone. What an honor to watch God work in her life. Because she asked me to pray for her. That's a big blessing to me. To pray for somebody and watch God work. It's so powerful. What more can we ask for in life? Relationships is what life is about. That's what Jesus wants us to have. He wants relationships in life. That's what mentoring means to me.
Brian and I were chatting when we saw the video for the first time, and literally said, that's probably better than anything we're going to say the entire sermon. That's just pure gold. Yep. So we decided that what we're going to do is we're actually just going to play the video on repeat like 10 times. So we captured the gravity of what was said and the brilliance of what was said. So we're just going to sit up here while we watch the video like a gazillion times, because that was incredible. Just so you know, my name is Matt. I'm one of the pastors here, and this is
Brian.
He's one of the pastors here. I think one of the things that we love so much about Deb and Morgan's story is we've seen it unfold over the course of many years, is that for them it's such a natural relationship. it's not something that's forced. It's not something that they have to like talk themselves into. Man, I guess I have to go do my mentoring meeting. It's just a natural relationship that's grown for them. And when I asked them, I saw them right after they filmed actually, and said, hey, how did it go? And they were like, well, it was awesome. It was really hard. And why it was hard? And they were like, well, it's not like we have a linear story that we decided we needed a mentor and I needed to mentor someone, and so we ended up getting paired up. No, it was just a very comfortable, natural relationship with two people who just wanted to get to know each other. And I mentioned this the first week of this series that we live under this premise here that programs seldom change people, but people often change people. And relationships, deep relationships, are the things that matter. And it requires hard work. It requires us meeting face to face, like actually having face-to-face interaction, putting down our phones and all of that stuff, putting down anything that uses an electrical outlet, right? That it's all about relationships. Programs seldom change people. People often change people, and that's why we love their story. And what we hope, and we're going to talk about this later today in this teaching, is that really at the end of the day, we want all of you to have mentoring relationships. Deep relationships where you can grow together and learn about Jesus through each other. And so that's really what we're hoping to do. And so what's interesting is that for this series has gone through, it's 3 weeks long, so this is the last week of it, and it's based upon the 3 movements in the Join Generations book. And so the first movement is the movement looking backward, and where we looked at a lot of sociological things that have happened in our world, a lot of the things that have happened in church over time that have in a lot of ways caused generations to be split, or we would use the word siloed here, that generations are siloed. And so we talked a lot about sociologically, why is this happening, and then how can we reclaim intergenerational relationships. And then Brian last week talked from the second movement of the book, which is looking upward, which is this whole idea of how does God view mentoring relationships or intergenerational relationships where we can learn from each other. And so Brian covered that last week, looking upward. And then this third movement is the movement looking forward. Looking forward. How do we look forward as a church, as a body of people, as people, as families in general? How do we move forward? And here's what happened. What's interesting about the third part of the book is that as I was writing it and processing through it, and I thought to myself, some of this is really ethereal. It's really theoretical. Let's make it really practical. So the third part of the book is just a ton of stories. Tons and tons of stories about how this has fleshed its way out. And because of that, I'm working here for 8 years or so, a lot of the stories are from you guys. Things that I've heard from you, that you've taught me about joining generations and intergenerational ministry. And so because of that, we have shared a ton of these stories in the past. So Brian and I were talking as we were going through this teaching, we were like, do we reiterate some of these stories and say them again because they're important, as a good reminder, or do we cover something new? And so I talked a little bit about, in one section of the book, about something. We're deepening that in the third part here to talk about something that, honestly, I don't think we've ever really talked about in a sermon before. So we're kind of deepening what's in the third part of the book, and hope that you'll check out the other parts as well because they're important. So that said, the other thing that I wanted to say is that at our Saturday services, we've been trying something, and it's gone really, really well. And so what we're doing is we're actually doing the thing that we've done in Saturday services at all 3 of our services this weekend. And that's that we've been doing a live Q&A on Saturdays. Where at the end of the teaching, we leave some time to just answer questions that people might have and sort through it. And so here's your information on how you can go about doing that. You can use Twitter or you can use your mobile phone. And the first way is that you can tweet your questions to @FrontlineGR if you use Twitter. And then the second way is you can text your questions in using that number. We'll actually have the digits on each of the slides. We'll have this information so you can put that in. Now here's what happened last service. So I'm going to give you a warning and ask you to do something. Last service, we had a gazillion questions come through. They all came in the last 3 minutes of the sermon. So what happened is it actually locked up our system to do the Q&A. So as you're thinking of questions throughout the sermon that deals with Join Generations, the series in particular, previous 2 weeks, or today in general, send them in as you think of them. The information will be up on the screen, so we just want to make sure that you don't break our system like the first service did. Sound good? Cool. So we had a ton of questions, we just couldn't get to them. We answered like 4 or 5 of them, and then the system just blew up and caught on fire. So anyway, Brian is going to talk about what we're talking about today.
Awesome. How are you guys doing today? Good. Well, Matthew and I are going to co-teach. We're going to blend this together, just like lemon lime jello. It's going to be just a perfect blend. But what we want to talk about today is rituals, which may sound incredibly boring when you hear me say that. My family has a ritual. For each member of our family, every 365 days, every time the earth goes around the sun one more time, we do this thing where we bake a loaf of sugar bread, and we cover it with grease and sugar, and then we actually will write on this thing. It's the only item of food that I can think of that we actually write on before we eat it. And then what we'll do is we'll actually light it on fire. We'll put candles in it and set it on fire. And then we sing the exact same song every single time for each person. Every single time it's been 365 days for them. And does your family have a similar ritual? Do you guys do this at all as well? Yes, this would be called the happy birthday routine, right? It's a ritual that our family engages in. And rituals are extremely important in our lives and in our family and in the church. Ritual, you may never really think about it or really engage with what you're doing, but we have rituals all the time for all kinds of things. Rituals ground us and root us and remind us what matters and what's important in life. And they help us bring what was important to previous generations forward and help us teach our kids and help them understand what's important as we move forward. So we just want to talk about rituals and the roles that they play and how we can use those. So there's a couple things really quick to understand. First of all, there's a difference between rituals and rites of passage. And people get those confused a lot of times. So very quickly, just to give you an idea what we're talking about when we use the word rituals. Rituals are something that's ongoing. Okay, so it's something you do again and again and again, like saying happy birthday every single time to a family member. It's a recognition of something that's already true or real. So it's basically a group of people publicly affirming something that's already true or real. Some other examples could be like a family vacation, right? I bet you guys are planning a family vacation at some point this summer, or maybe you just got back from one over spring break. Taking a family vacation does not make you a family, right? You're already a family, but going on a family vacation together is a ritual that you do to kind of, and it reconnects you and reminds you, oh, that's right, we're not just individuals who are here to produce and make things and do things. We're a family. Family vacations have this way of reminding you of that. It's a ritual. For pastors, when we become pastors in ministry, there's an ordination ceremony. It's a ritual, a service where people publicly affirm that you are now a pastor. In our denomination, what's funny about that is you actually serve as a pastor for 2 years, supervised under someone else, before you can do that. So you're already a pastor. You're already doing all the things you do as a pastor, and then there's this ritual, this public affirmation affirming you. And we do this again and again for pastors. Okay, so that's a ritual. A rite of passage is a little different. A rite of passage is a one-time thing. It's like a new stage of life. And it's the act itself that's the rite of passage. And it signifies a change in perspective, or it signifies really that you've moved to the next stage of life. Okay, so rites of passage, if you think are things like getting your driver's license. That's a rite of passage in our society. Right now you can drive, you move to this next phase. If you think about it, your first kiss, right? Everybody remembers the name of the person, right? It was your first kiss. It was because it was this rite of passage. It was this moment. Graduation is a rite of passage. Retirement is a rite of passage, oftentimes that we don't celebrate enough or recognize. So those are examples of rites of passage, and when we put rituals around rites of passage, it helps ground us and root us, and helps us remember what really matters, right?
Yeah. So what we want to do here is I think it's pretty important to ask a question right up front, because some of you are thinking to yourselves, well, great. Why practice them then? Why do we need to do rituals? What does it even mean for us? So we want to ask this question today is, what do rituals do for us? What do rituals do for us? And we're going to go through just 3 things here throughout this teaching that rituals do for us. And the first one is this, that rituals helps us to build rhythms that give meaning to everyday moments in our lives. What tends to happen happen with a ritual is something that we often just experience together anyway. And oftentimes this thing is very mundane, but the ritual that you attach to the mundane experience actually gives meaning to the experience that we have. And so rituals help us do this. It helps give meaning to everyday moments that we have in our lives. And there's this guy named Job. And Job's in the Old Testament, and it's a story. It's this book in the Bible about his story. And right at the beginning of Job, 4 verses in, it's like the writer wants to tell us something about who Job is. And so this is what it says. Job 1:4-5 says, his sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays. That's funny, ironic. They're probably eating cake and setting it on fire. So, and they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning, he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, and this is what his kids are like, perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Yikes. But then there's this one line at the end, and it says, this was Job's regular custom. This was Job's regular custom. That intrinsic to Job and who he is, he sets this ritual in place that whenever that would have happened, he would sacrifice on behalf of his kids just in case they had sinned and cursed God in their hearts. This was his regular custom. It gave meaning to this moment, this sacrifice to God, just in case his kids had done this. All throughout the Old Testament are rituals. There's this particular ritual that God puts in place for the Israelites. And the Israelites are, the ritual that God tells them to do is this meal that becomes a very significant meal for the Israelites. Brian will talk about it a little bit later, but it's this meal called the Passover meal. And the Passover it's a meal. It's what we do. We eat all the time, some more than others. But we eat food, right? It's a natural, it's a thing we do, and then he attaches meaning to this by doing this Passover meal. And the Passover represented this idea that God freed the Israelites out of Egypt. He frees them. They're no longer in slavery or bondage, and this Passover becomes a critically important part of their daily life as Israelites.
Right. So that's the first one, that rituals give us rhythm that brings meaning to everyday moments of our lives. The second idea with rituals is that rituals help all generations in the church remember what's important to Jesus. They help all generations in the church reconnect with or remember what's important to Jesus. Matthew just used the example of Passover, right? That there was this ritual of Passover where the Israelites would celebrate this meal, celebrating the fact that they had been freed by God from Egypt, and they would teach their kids this. Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, gathers his disciples together, and they're celebrating the Passover meal together. They're doing this ritual together, and Jesus takes that moment, and he takes bread, and he takes a cup, and institutes a new ritual in the midst of that Passover ritual that we know as communion, right? Or maybe if you're from a different background, maybe you called it the Eucharist, or the Lord's Supper, or the Lord's Table. But Jesus says, this is the new covenant in my blood. And he says, this cup and this bread represent my body, my blood, which is broken for you in this new covenant. And then Jesus' final words, he says, do this in remembrance of me. And that's why, for centuries and centuries, Christians have been taking bread and cup, and they've been celebrating communion. They've been doing this ritual. So you had the Passover ritual. Jesus is in the midst of celebrating it, and he brings a new ritual to it and says, this is important. You've got to do this to remember me and remember what's important to me. And next weekend, we're going to celebrate communion together as a church. And so we still do this today. But there are other examples. It's one of the few things where Jesus says, keep doing this. Just do this in remembrance of me. But there are other things that have become rituals that Jesus did. If you grew up Catholic, maybe you said the Lord's Prayer regularly, or the Our Father. It was a prayer that Jesus taught his disciples that became a ritual. Foot washing is a ritual. Jesus in John 13 takes off his outer garment and begins to wash his disciples' feet. Now that was an everyday moment. That was something that happened all the time. You would come to someone's house and you would need to have your feet washed because it was filthy. And so Jesus, typically that was done by a servant. Jesus takes his position of a servant and washes his disciples' feet. As if to say, it was a ritual, what he was doing there. That had meaning to say, this is the posture you should take before anyone in your life. And his final words there is that he says, if you want to be blessed, you should do this. Do this if you want to be blessed. So rituals ground us. They help us remember in the church what matters and what's important to Jesus. And that's why we continue to do them again and again and again.
So the third part of this is, it's similar to the second one in that it helps us remember, but it's different, it's nuanced a little bit. The third one is this, is that rituals help us to see or remember how previous generations worshipped Christ. And if I can just be honest, I think that I'm 34 years old. So they say the millennials started around like 84, so I'm a couple of years too young to be a part of the millennials. But I think my generation, maybe millennials, have this kind of feeling that we don't want to practice Christianity or church or religion in the same way that our parents did. Like for my parents, the boomers. That, okay, my parents practice Christianity this way, but I don't really want to do it this way. I want to do it this way. And there's nothing wrong with that because things shift and change over time, and that's even part of the ritual idea is that things kind of are tweaked and they change. But here's the thing, is that my parents' generation, the boomers, have done things in the church and set things up in the church for particular reasons that when we begin to understand why they are doing the things that they're doing, it gives whole new meaning to it, and we can understand, oh, that previous generation or generations ago, the builders before the boomers, that's why they practiced that. And we begin to understand, oh, like hymns, which are really important for boomers in church. And they've been important for thousands of years, but particularly for boomers, there's meaning to that. That's really critically important for us to know those things. There's nothing wrong with hymns at all. But when we understand the meaning behind it, it's especially important. There's this really well-known church historian, theologian. He's a contemporary, so he's a little newer, and his name is Thomas Oden. And Thomas Oden had this quote, and I shared it with Brian, and Brian's like, you have to use that quote in the sermon. So if you hate it, it's totally his fault. But this is the quote. It says, I was once hesitant to trust anyone over 30. Now I hesitate to trust anyone under 300. Isn't that brilliant? But what he's getting at is this idea that when you're young, you think that anybody who's old, they don't have it together. They don't know what they're talking about. But then when you get older, you really begin to understand that people who are younger don't have the life experience that they need. And so Thomas Oden would say, man, I am beginning to learn and mature and understand that people who did things hundreds, thousands of years ago, there's meaning for us today. We can understand how different generations worship. The early church institutes, like after Jesus has died, they institute different practices that we still practice today. And sometimes we practice it and we don't know the meaning, and sometimes we practice it and we deeply know the meaning. Like, for example, the early church instituted this practice of Lent, which is the 40 days leading up to Easter. Kind of centering us in Jesus. And then there's this whole idea of Advent, which is the weeks leading up to Christmas, where we celebrate the incarnation of Jesus. And so Lent, Advent are those kinds of things. And then another thing that the early church did, which is fascinating, is that they took this idea of Passover way back in the Old Testament, this whole meal, this Passover idea, that Jesus kind of changes and tweaks a little bit to become the Lord's Supper that we would know today, or communion that we would know it. And the early church even takes that idea and kind of changes it or tweaks it a little bit, but there's tremendous meaning to it. And so what the early church, Jesus just used wine during this meal with the disciples, but the early church said, you know what? What if we could do something different? So this guy named Hippolytus, which is a great name, by the way. It's one name. It's not two names. Not Hippo, last name Litus. Entire name Hippolytus. He decided back, this is like 200, 300 AD, really soon after Jesus, he decided, along with a bunch of other theologians then, hey, what would happen if we, instead of just using wine, we would incorporate water and wine, and we would mix the water and wine together during communion. And he said this, the reason why we should do this is because water represents the church, it represents the people of the church, but wine represents Jesus' blood that was shed on the cross for us, that was spilled on the cross. And we're going to mix them together, because when you mix those elements together, they become inseparable, just like Jesus and the church are inseparable. There's incredible meaning to this practice. And then you have Hippolytus, who decided to add something even different to it. And he decided, let's add in the third element. And so what Hippolytus did was he used milk during communion. Bizarre, right? Without the context, it doesn't really make sense. But the reason why Hippolytus chooses to use milk is he says, when we do communion, when we celebrate this ritual, we should use milk because it's a reminder of the fact that God gave the Israelites the land flowing with milk and honey. It's this reminder that what rituals do is they teach us how previous generations worship Christ. They give us deep meaning so that we can appreciate them for extended periods of time.
So, kind of to turn that and say, okay, so what about us today? What does that mean for us? Here's kind of the question we wanted to land with. It's this idea, what if we need to keep creating rituals in order to bring meaning to everyday moments in our lives? What if we were intended to continue creating new rituals? Just like you see God instituted Passover, and it was this ritual, and then Jesus brought fresh meaning to it with communion, and then even after Jesus, the church began to bring fresh meaning with different ways to even make communion more meaningful, with milk or with whatever it was. Somehow in the modern West, we just kind of stopped reinventing rituals, and we just kind of let them go stagnant and flat. What if we were intended? What if we need to keep doing that in the church? What if we need to keep doing that in our families? So Matthew and I were talking as we were putting this sermon together about when if some of these moments happen in our lives where we've seen the power of a ritual. And so for me, I was thinking about something that actually happened with your family, with Matthew's family. And so about this time last year, almost exactly a year ago, Matthew and Megan adopted a little boy named Silas. And we don't, in the church, we don't have like a ritual for families that adopt. Okay, we have like child dedication and other things like that. We don't have a ritual specifically to publicly affirm people who adopt children. And so what happened was there was this courthouse moment. There's an actual ceremony they do at the courthouse, and it's called, what is it called again?
It's like an adoption finalization.
Okay, adoption finalization. It's basically the only happy time you go to the courthouse. It's the only time where people are actually smiling and happy there. And so there was this court date set where Silas was going to officially become a Deprez. And so what Matthew and Megan did is they invited a whole bunch of us from church. Those small group members, right, and a bunch of us on staff.
Friends from the church.
Right, just people who have been meaningful in your life to kind of come and publicly witness this moment.
Yeah.
And so we all went to the courthouse together. We've got a picture of it here, actually. This is all of us at the courthouse who came.
Maybe I'm partial, but that's an awesome picture.
That is. That's Silas and the judge right there holding Silas. And so there was this very ritual ceremony that went through. The judge went through. His name, Silas's name, officially got changed to Deprez. And when the moment came to put the gavel down, actually they came up and they put the gavel in Silas's hand as this tiny little infant. And they all, as a family, kind of came together and smacked the gavel to officially say, okay, this moment is official. And a bunch of us, like several people, read letters, right? Letters that had been written to Silas and what we go through your family. And we all just kind of publicly affirmed this. And here's what was interesting about this. They had already been a family before this moment. Right? Like Silas was in there, you guys were changing his diapers, feeding them, he was in your care. They were already a family before this moment. But there was something powerful about this moment where we all publicly affirmed and said, yes, this is a family. We publicly affirm that God has put these people together to be a family, and that Silas is officially a Deprez. And for me, it was this powerful, which all of us, we were emotionally moved by just being a part of this moment. And I sat there, the thought that was going through my mind was, now this is church, right? We're sitting here in a courthouse, and I'm thinking, this is church. This is what we're supposed to do for one another. And it just came together, the power of it, in this one ritual with several different generations of people who had spoken into your family. be a part of it.
Yeah, I remember we were talking, and Brian shared that, and so what about for you? And the story that came to mind for me, it was an odd one, it was a strange one, but I remember we've adopted before. We adopted our 5-year-old Isaiah, and when we were in that process of adopting, didn't have a ton of money because we were trying to pay the adoption, and so Christmas time was coming, and we didn't have the money to get our family Christmas presents. And so right around then, one of a former staff member who worked here, her name's Terry Hansen, she was preaching a sermon one time, and she talked about this ritual that her family did. And I loved the idea, and I'll tell you what it is in a second. I loved the idea so much that I was like, I need to do that too. And so what the idea was, she said that there was this thing that she did called a memory box. And it was she took a shoebox and made it look all nice and cut a hole in the top, and then stuffed it full of different memories from her family. And so I was like, I need to do that, but I didn't want to plagiarize her. So instead of doing a memory box, I was like, why don't I do a memory jar?
Whatever makes you sleep at night.
That's right. I felt good about that choice. So we went and got like a big mason jar, like one of those big glass mason jars with tops on it, and I just started typing out memories from when I was a kid. Memories that were happy memories, sad memories, grieving type of memories, and just got this huge list. I mean, by the end, it was somewhere around 500 or 600 different memories that I had. And I cut them out in little pieces of paper, little strips, and then folded them up and just stuffed them into this big jar. And we sent this memory jar to my parents. And when they opened it up, we said, hey, the idea for you is this